For those who don't know me, I'm Peter Liebman. I'm the CEO of the Harry Perkins Institute, and a very warm welcome to you all. The Perkins is 26 years young. We started in 1998 with a goal to unify Western Australian medical researchers, originally housed in the basement of Sir Charles Gardner Hospital and in the Medical Research Foundation. And for those of you who know the Institute, you'll know we have the privilege of working in two beautiful facilities, one at the QE2 campus and one south at the Fiona Stanley Hospital. In total, we're about 550 very dedicated and passionate researchers, and we want to defeat those really important diseases: heart disease, cancer, diabetes and rare genetic diseases. And tonight is very special for lots of reasons, but for those of you who have been following the Wesfarmers orations, we haven't had them here before in this fantastic venue. And we knew, in fact, that the demand would outstrip our 254-seat auditorium, which is fantastic at the QE2 site. So that's why we're here, because we knew that you all wanted to hear Professor Richard Scolyer talk, and all 585 of you. So it's going to be a fantastic evening. Why do we call the Wesfarmers Harry Perkins Oration? How did it happen, and why are we here tonight? If you look at the top of our two buildings, our QE2 building and our Fiona Stanley Hospital building, we pay homage to Harry, who was the first chairman of this wonderful organisation. And he was chairman, of course, as many of you will know, when it was called the Western Australian Institute for Medical Research, a real mouthful. And he was single-handedly able to provide, through Wesfarmers, $5 million as the initial donation to get us going. So it's wonderful for us that we've had such amazing support from Wesfarmers for all these years. And tonight we continue that with their continued support of this wonderful annual oration. And we're also thrilled, absolutely thrilled, that we have an ongoing relationship with Harry's daughter, Jane Allen. And Jane, I haven't seen you for a little while. You've been embedded in the Institute, and it's wonderful that we've got to know you so well. So please welcome Jane Allen, who's going to say a few words about her father, Harry Perkins. Thank you. Oh, is that right? Okay. Yes. I didn't realise. That's okay. Come back from the States.
Indeed.
Oh, wonderful.
Good evening. My job here tonight is to try and give a little bit of the character of who Harry Perkins is, and that's not an easy task. I thought, what would Dad say if he was here tonight? You would have been presented with a man of incredible enthusiasm, and he'd have two messages for you tonight. The first is to this audience. We have over 500 people here interested in medical research, and that would make Dad so excited. I suspect that Dad would have been on the phone the last few weeks and said, hey, it's okay, I'm not asking you for money. I've got this really exciting talk, I want you to come. And then in a few weeks' time, he'd come back to you and say, hey, can you help me make this possible? Many of you have helped support the Institute financially, and we thank you for that. Dad always believed that cooperation gives the best results. When the two Peters came and approached him as chairman of Wesfarmers and asked for help in funding Weimar, he said, I can help you if you get all the all the research institutions and all the hospitals working together. Patricia Kalis apparently was approached by Dad, and he sold this vision of how medical researchers could work together. And she said, it's a lovely vision, Harry, it would be fabulous, but medicos are far too stovepiped, it will never happen. She said to me she was very pleased that Dad proved her wrong. One of the characteristics of the Institute that they've created from the beginning has been this collaboration, A breast cancer researcher will be working across the bench from a liver researcher who is working next to a cardiovascular researcher who's working across from a melanoma or genetics researcher. And those interactions will allow shared resources, shared knowledge, and hopefully create new research. Our speaker tonight is the embodiment of this crossover between fields. Here we have melanoma research being applied to a brain tumour. And just maybe, we might be surprised and excited by the results. Thank you all for supporting medical research here in WA. And Richard, we look forward to hearing what you have to share.
All right, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Richard Scolyer, AO, our 2024 Wesfarmers Harry Perkins Orator. Richard is the Co-Medical Director of the Melanoma Institute of Australia in Sydney, a senior staff specialist in tissue pathology and diagnostic oncology, and that equals a pathologist for everyone who's non-medical, at RPA in Sydney, and a conjoint professor at the University of Sydney Medical School. Professor Scolyer is quite simply a superstar in melanoma pathology. He is the highest ever published scientist in the world in the field of melanoma pathology, and in 2022 he was recognised as the world's leading melanoma pathologist. He has co-authored more than 800 papers, books, chapters, and that's an extraordinary number, publishing in the highest quality journals, New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, Nature, Cell. His work's been cited over 63,000 times, and if you think about that, that is an enormous number. So I think he's getting his message out pretty well. He's presented at over 400 conferences around the world. He's received multiple national and international awards. And I just chose 3 to give you a glimpse of these. In 2020, he was the New South Wales Premier's Award for Outstanding Cancer Researcher. In 2018, he was given the Lifetime Achievement Award in Anatomical Pathology from the prestigious MD Anderson Cancer Centre in Texas. I'm not going to mention anything about the election. And in 2023, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society of Melanoma Research, and the list goes on and on. In 2021, he was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia, AO, for distinguished service to medicine, particularly in the field of melanoma and skin cancer. And as I'm sure you all know, earlier this year, Professor Scolyer and his great colleague, Professor Georgina Long, were jointly named as 2024 Australians of the Year. Unfortunately, Georgina can't be with us. She's at a conference, as far as I'm aware. So you can imagine it's been incredibly hectic for Richard and his family for this year. So we're particularly grateful for the fact that his wife, Dr. Katie Nicol, and could actually make it over here with Richard for this oration. This morning, both of them spent the time at the Perkins having a great conversation with multiple melanoma researchers. A whole lot of our young, early to mid-career researchers had an opportunity to hear some of Richard's wisdom, and it was a wonderful day. For those of you who know Richard, you'll know he's simply an amazing individual who has an amazing and courageous story to tell you all about. So the title tonight of the 2024 Wesfarmers Harry Perkins Oration is Battling Cancer, a melanoma researcher who becomes a brain cancer patient. Please join with me and welcome Professor Richard Scolyer, AO, to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here to deliver this oration. To be honest, I never thought that I'd be performing on stage before. My wife calls me a bit of an actor sometimes, but I never thought I'd reach the stage here. So anyway, what I thought I'd do is take you through the melanoma journey, what we've learnt in melanoma, how we've trying to change the field, or how we have changed the field, but we've still got more work to do, and then tell you a bit about my own personal journey as a cancer patient. So, can I please have my first slide up on the screen? If I push this button, here we go. 1957 was a big year. Does anyone know what happened back then? I'm sure you do. But it was the first time in the world that had been recognised that melanoma was associated with sun exposure, and it was recognised by Australians. Lancaster and Nelson recognised that the incidence of melanoma was higher up in Queensland than it was down in Tasmania, so recognised this association, and they published this work in the Medical Journal of Australia. So we're the first in the world to recognise this. It's become Australia's national cancer, but the research and treatment of the disease in many parts of it have been spearheaded by Australian teams. So that's something that I think we can be proud of. But the problem is the incidence of melanoma continues to rise. So on these two graphs up here, it's men and women over different ages, but you can still see the slopes are going up. So I think it's about 66 per 100,000 people per year. This shows the incidence in different states of Australia, and as I mentioned earlier, it's higher up north than it is down south. But we do have, with New Zealand, the highest incidence in the world. In Australia, one Australian gets diagnosed with melanoma every 30 minutes. And despite the advances that we've made already, still one Australian dies from this disease every 6 hours. So we've still got a lot of work to do to get us to where we're trying to head. So because of these reasons, it's often referred to as Australia's national cancer. It's also the commonest cancer in 20 to 39-year-olds in our country. So when young people get melanoma, it can have a big impact on their life, their productivity, and what happens in the future. So it's an important disease for us to try and make a difference to. I don't think I quite have the same title as you, Peter, but anyway, it's the same story that I'm going to be talking about. I also wanted to reiterate Len's kind comments and to say thank you to him for sharing his words and also pay tributes to the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and pay our respects to the elders past and present. This is what I'm aiming to get through today, so I'll gradually go through this as we go through the talk. So first of all, an introduction. What is skin cancer? Is it all one thing, or are there different types of skin cancer? Well, there are actually many, many different types, but the three commonest types are basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. Basal cell carcinoma is really common. 2 in 3 Australians develop basal cell carcinoma during the course of their life. And melanoma is a lot less common, 1,000 times less common than what basal cell carcinoma is. But in fact, melanoma is much more aggressive, much more lethal disease. If it's more than 1 millimetre thick, the prognosis is serious. Whereas basal cell carcinoma, the number of people who die from that are thousands of times less than melanoma. So that's why we concentrate on that disease. I hope you can still hear me okay. Skin cancer is a major problem for us in Australia because it's so common. It causes morbidity for people in the community, even if the forms are not deadly. And it causes a big cost to the Australian community through personal costs and through taxpayer costs. So it's something we need to do something about. And try and make lives better and save money for all of us as taxpayers. And we need to invest in doing that. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, skin cancer prevention. And we know that if you prevent a disease, it's better than getting it. And for many diseases, we don't know what causes them, so you can't do something about it. But we know that skin cancer is predominantly caused by sun exposure. So if we can bring in the right policies, invest in doing that, you get payback. So for $1 spent, some studies have said it's $16 that you get back as Australians if we do that. So we want that to happen, and there's obviously other benefits for the community. In 2022, we brought together experts from around the country to look at the melanoma problem and developed a State of the Nation report, which we presented to government. It was launched by government, and it highlights some of the problems in this area, what we need to do to make a difference. And today I want to highlight to you some of the things we've done, but other things that we need to do to get us to where we need to head to. As I say, we've met with government, they've done some things, they launched a parliamentary Friends of Melanoma. We keep visiting ministers, Prime Minister, to try and get them on board to do things, and they have done things. But we've also teamed up with the Australian Melanoma and Skin Cancer Alliance, particularly consumers and advocates who are trying to make a difference. And by us all working together, that's how you make change happen, being part of a team. I think this applies to all aspects of life. If you want to make a difference, be part of a team. Get people with different skill sets to work together. And if you do that, that's when you can make a big difference. So more on that later. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Melanoma Institute Australia, how we're set up and how we're trying to tackle this problem of melanoma. So we're actually a network. We have this place called the Post Centre, which is the centre of it, but there's aspects of care all over Sydney. And Peter kindly mentioned that I'm employed by the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, but also work at the University of Sydney. So we're involved in many things. We've got an incredible team of people who work across Sydney, and we're all dedicated and fighting to get to 0 deaths from melanoma. I'm proud of what we've achieved already, but we've still got a lot of work to do. We've got 3 pillars of activity. Number 1 is caring for patients. So that's really important. We want to get that right, and we want to improve the care of patients. But because of all the patients we see, which is more than 2,000 per year, it gives us an opportunity to do other things, like perform important research and also educate clinical colleagues, but not just them, the community, about skin cancer and other diseases, and try and make a difference. So these are our 3 pillars of activity. But the thing about doing research is we can help not just the patients who come to see us, but can have an impact on people right the way around the world. So research is critical to what you do. It really can turbocharge changes across the country and around the world. But as I mentioned, patients are at the centre of everything that we do. And Australians are different to many other patients around the world. And I'll come to a bit more of this in a moment. But they're involved in all of our work in research, education and clinical care. We have a research strategy, and as I say, it's a team of people who are doing things. We've got 4 principal themes of research, and basically they follow the patient journey. The first one's around prevention, the second one's around early diagnosis and treatment, third one is treatment of and research around advanced stage melanoma when it's spread around the body, and the last one's around supportive care and survivorship. And across each of these we have health economics, because we want to prove anything that we say should happen is cost effective. As I said, patients are at the centre of what we do, but we're really lucky at the Melanoma Institute because we have Australian patients. Australians are incredibly generous, and I'm sure you all saw this during COVID. When it came out and we had to stay at home, I know you guys had it better than we did in the eastern states for some time, but Australians want to do the right thing by others, and it's more than what I saw on TV in other countries. People don't follow the rules as well to look after people that they don't actually personally know themselves. And we find Australians are very generous about allowing us to collect information about them, to collect their specimens, to participate in clinical trials. And this allows us to do research that other countries struggle with to do, and it can make a really big difference to patients ultimately. So just to give you an idea or see what this is like in action, every Friday morning at 7 o'clock we meet, and we've done this. I've been working at the Melanoma Institute for 26 years, but it's happening since the 1960s when the Institute was called Sydney Melanoma Clinic, then Sydney Melanoma Unit, and now Melanoma Institute of Australia. But it's been doing this since it started. So we meet at 7 o'clock Friday morning and we discuss the most challenging melanoma problems. And there's a team of about 50 to sometimes 70 people that get on board, and we try and work out what's the best management for this patient. Often what happens during that meeting, we don't know the answer. Questions come up, and we want to help not just this patient, but future patients. So that feeds into our research program, and we get addressed, that we address the question, and using those resources that I've already outlined that are better than what anyone else has got in the world in melanoma gives us an opportunity to do research, publish that research, which ultimately gets included into clinical practice guidelines, the WHO classification, and ultimately gets fed back into management of patients, both in our institution but around the world. And it keeps going like this, and this is how we've made a difference so far, and we're going to keep trying until we get to our goal of 0 deaths from melanoma. We turn out quite a few papers, and often in the important high-impact journals. But all research is very important, and I had a great time today meeting with the team at the Harry Perkins and hearing about the research that they're doing. There's some amazing up-and-coming stars and some established stars doing great research. So that was a real thrill for me today. Next, I want to move on and talk about prevention, because prevention is better than cure. Our team at the Melanoma Institute were the first people in the world to recognise that sunbeds cause melanoma, particularly in young people. It's actually really high risk, and this led to them being banned from commercial use, state by state, but now throughout Australia and a small number of other states in the US and some other countries, which is great news, but they're not banned totally. You can use them for personal use, and in fact, some people set up backyard businesses with them. But they should be banned totally, in my view. But we've done some work, and we've made some progress there. We all know the sun-smart messaging rules: slip, slop, slap, seek the shade, put on your sunglasses, and that's a really important message. Started in the 1980s and has had an impact. And at school, in most states, it's no hat, no play policy, and that message gets through, but we need to modernise it and to keep it going. Again, I mentioned this idea: you invest money in prevention, it will save the country moving forward. We obviously need to keep doing it. We need to rejuvenate it so it keeps getting across to people. If you say the same thing all the time, they don't listen, and we need to modernise it. We live in a different country now. People don't just watch TV or look at newspapers. So that's another thing that we need to do. And what do we do? What do we do now with our prevention messaging? How does it get out there? Across the country in Australia now, there's different messaging that happens in different states. There's a variety of political reasons why this happens. But if you want to have the most effective campaign, in my view, you want to have the same message that you hear repeatedly wherever you are in the country. So in our view, we need to have a nationwide uniform policy, or not just policy, messaging about the importance of prevention and sun protective behaviour. In fact, we did have a meeting with government last week, and there's positive things that are happening on that front. So I think we're heading in the right direction. Sport is a fantastic part of life. In Australia, we live in this beautiful country. We love going to the beach. We love playing in sport. We encourage our kids and all of us to participate. It's great for our health. But we just need to be sun smart when we do it. So for us, this is low-hanging fruit. We need to make a difference in this area. With the Australian Institute of Sport, we developed a sun safety in sport position statement that was launched just before Christmas last year. Elite athletes are already taking this on board, but we need to filter this down to grassroots level, because there's many more people who are at a lower level who are playing sport who need to get the messaging. A lot of easy things that you could do to reduce the risk of skin cancer, protecting your body. Don't do it in the middle of the day if you can. Even for the umpires, the spectators, they need to be covered up. The little things that we need to keep doing. You heard on the news late last year that elite swimmers in Queensland have got a 9 times higher risk of getting melanoma than other people of the same age. And that's because of sun protection. We've got to get better at it. I want to give you one example. I love my sport too. And one thing I like doing is triathlons. And until very recently, if you're in the Australian team, you had to wear a singlet type top. And that's terrible for the sun. And a couple of years ago, I suggested to Triathlon Australia, this is wrong. We've got to change it so you can cover your arms up. And they put into the world body to do this. And they said, no, it can't be done. Everyone's got to wear the same uniforms. Anyway, the next year they put in a formal policy that the World Triathlon Union listened to. And now this year, for the first time, that's my son up the top and him with me down the bottom, we're allowed to wear sleeved uniforms. And many people around the world are now doing this. So this is only something very small example, but we have to keep doing these things if we really want to make a difference and get us this goal of 0 deaths from melanoma. One of the big challenges that we've got is the glamorisation of tanning, particularly in young people and teenagers. And it's a much tougher thing to get through. How are we going to do this? And I'm certainly no expert in this area. And I'm sure if I tried to speak to young people, it would be an ineffective messaging. But what can we do? So we need to think about different ways, talk with experts. But the things like media, social media, influencers, they can help us. The fashion industry, perhaps peer group, putting pressure on each other. Should there be advertising controls, legal or guidelines given to advertisers so they show sun-smart behaviour in their adverts? Should there be taxes like there are in some other causes of cancer? Or should some products be banned? I think we need to get people together who are experts in this sort of area and come together so we can try and make a difference to the glamorisation of tanning. To give you an example, a couple of years ago, Georgina and I, along with Kate Campbell, were doing an address at the National Press Club. And something had come out over the previous few months of sunburnt tan lines. And you could put a hashtag on this on TikTok. And it had 900 million postings. Unbelievable. So we highlighted it in our press club address. And then, incredibly, the next week, TikTok reached out to us and said, we want to do something about this. So they launched a campaign called Tanning That's Cooked. If you put in sunburn, sun, tan, whatever, this would come up and you'd have to go through it. So this is one example, but we weren't expecting this. But these are the sorts of things we need to push forward to try and make a difference. Another program we've developed is the Student SunSafe Ambassador program that's started this year for the first time in Western Australia. We're trying to roll it out across the country. We take in a couple of students. In fact, I've got a video I'm going to show you. Sorry, it's a bit loud.
Welcome to the SunSafe Student Ambassador Program. It's so fantastic to see you all here today. we're really looking forward to a very exciting day.
I thought today was amazing. I wasn't aware of the disease before, and now I know a lot about it.
I thought today's presentation around melanoma and upskilling the students in how to present back to their peers was absolutely sensational.
Knowing about melanoma, I'll be able to explain to people why they should do sun safety.
Public speaking is the #1 fear in the world. So it's normal to feel fear, but when you understand that the reason it's there is purely driven by an ancient part of our brain, we can start to actually manage it.
I learned a lot about public speaking and how to really keep the audience engaged.
After learning all these things today, I will definitely be changing my habits and behaviours.
We can now give that message out and spread the word about melanoma and how to prevent it.
Well, that's that campaign. Sorry, I should have had a break between this next slide. But so moving on, that's something we're really proud of getting the message through to young people, and we want to continue to do that. But there's many other things that we need to do. We've actually developed risk calculators to say what your risk is of getting skin cancer. And this, for this, at the time, 53-year-old man who grew up in Tasmania, me, with blonde hair and who had a BCC, my risk of getting melanoma was 22%, is what it says on the calculator. So all Australians, you can do that. There's no zero risk, so don't not follow the sun smart rules that we've already been discussing. Moving on to early diagnosis and risk prediction if you've got melanoma. So if we're going to screen and detect melanoma, how should we do it? One way is for us to tell all Australians to know the skin you're in. Look at yourself in the mirror, ask your partner or friend to look at the parts of your body that you can't see. And if you see something that's new or it's changing, then you need to get it checked out. So that's number one, know the skin you're in. What about sending all Australians to go and get a skin check all the time? Would that be a good thing to do? I think that happens in some parts of the community. Or should we set up a targeted risk screening program for high-risk individuals, like what we do for other cancers, for bowel cancer, breast cancer, just been launched for lung cancer, and some other cancers? Should we do something like that? So first of all, know the skin you're in. That's a really important message that I think we all should take away. We know from our research that most melanomas are detected by the patients themselves. So we want people to do that. In screening the entire population, there's a number of reasons why it's not the best thing to do. It's actually, there's a risk of overdiagnosis for some people, and things might get missed or get reassured. And it costs money to do so. So there's a number of reasons why this is not the best thing to do. Targeting high-risk patients is really important because you're looking at the right people who are at the higher risk of getting melanoma. So one thing that we actually developed a position statement called Skin Checks in Australia, which was backed by the whole melanoma community and patient groups, that this is what we needed to do, is those two things. And in fact, the government has now given us money to develop a national targeted screening program to define who the high risk population is, so it can be rolled out across the country. There's another thing that's we're using and rolling out in studies at the moment, but hopefully will be used widespreadly in the future, is using modern technologies and AI to identify melanomas early. There's a program called ACEMID, the Australian Centre of Excellence in Melanoma Imaging and Diagnosis, takes 93 pictures of your body really quickly and follows you up and detects changes. So that hopefully will make a difference. Another issue that we've got, not just in Australia, but around the world, is there's a problem with overdiagnosis of early melanomas, particularly in something called in situ melanoma. This is a pre-malignant term that we use in other cancers, and The incidence of in situ melanoma that's diagnosed by pathologists has increased, doubled in a very short period of time. They're actually quite bad in the United States, and there's a whole lot of things that it's related to. But in any case, through my work at the World Health Organization, we're trying to remove that as a term to help patients, but is the driver of it. And I think it's about to change in the next version of this that's about to come out. Another challenge that we've got is getting the right diagnosis. Sounds easy. Looking at something clinically, you can tell if it's melanoma or not, or some other sort of cancer. Then if you have biopsies sent to the pathologist, they can look at down the microscope and no worries at all. And it's true. In many cases, it is a straightforward diagnosis for us. That's what we're trained for. But unfortunately, there's a small number of cases where it's more challenging. In melanoma, for pathologists, about 20% of cases are not easy. And when we've looked at our data, when we get patients referred into us, so I said more than 2,000 a year, 5% of people who are diagnosed with melanoma don't actually have it. And we see patients sometimes who've been given a diagnosis of something else and actually have melanoma. So we have to do more to make things more accurate. We live in this modern world. We do have ability to do so. And so what we do now, what we're starting to do, is use our traditional tools, looking down the microscope, but where we need to, supplementing it with molecular data to improve the accuracy of testing. In fact, we use some genetic data that we published in this particular journal called Nature and developed a test, which we've now working with the university, the Melanoma Institute and local health district to try and get it commercialised and out into the public where it will make a difference, get the right diagnosis, save people's lives and save taxpayers money in Australia. I now want to talk a bit more about management of melanoma patients. So it's divided up into 4 stages. We use this thing called the American Joint Committee on Cancer staging system that I'm actually heavily involved in. But basically what it is if your melanoma is still localised in one spot, if it's a low risk at stage 1, if it's a high risk at stage 2, if it's spread to your local lymph glands, it's called stage 3, and if it's spread around your body, it's stage 4. So this is important for what we're going to talk about. We've developed a whole lot of tools. So one test that we do, work that John Thompson, who used to be the head of the Melanoma Institute, who now lives here in Perth, I don't know, he might even be in the audience tonight. He was intimately involved in the clinical trial that devised this thing called sentinel lymph node biopsy, where instead of taking all of the lymph glands out under your arm, he'd find the one lymph node. Surgeons would find that one lymph node where the tumour would first spread to. And you only have to take that one lymph node out, send it to the pathologist to get looked at, and then you don't have to have a big lymph node dissection. Anyway, with this calculator and with whatever info it was that I entered in, this patient has a 7% risk of, excuse me, I just feeling a little bit tired. To be honest, I'm not that good at, don't have that much energy these days. I'll tell you about that later on. But I have, I normally go to sleep at 7 o'clock on the Eastern Seaboard time. So, yeah, so it's a bit of a challenge. My lovely wife gave me some stuff during the day to keep me going. But anyway, she has to put up with a lot. That's the honest truth. Anyway, so we've got this risk calculator that can help manage melanoma patients, refine their management so it's more personalised. But we want to get better. We want to keep pushing things forward. For some patients, it makes a big difference. So when we've made these tools, the traditional way of putting patients into risk category groups is according to the staging system. So it's a thing that it only uses 2 factors. We've now come to the understanding that there's many other features that affect the prognosis for individual patients. So we've developed the risk prediction tools like I've shown you, but we now want to push it forward and use molecular features to improve the accuracy of prognosis for patients. And basically that's what we're doing at the Institute now, is trying to include molecular tools within the prognostic tools that I've just demonstrated to improve prediction of outlook for patients. What about treatment? Things have changed a lot over the years. Back in the days, people would have their primary melanoma excised in continuity with local lymph glands without them being tested. So it was massive surgery that people would have, and they'd be left with massive complications. Now, through some great work, clinical trials, it's been made much smaller. I mentioned before that nowadays we only take out one lymph node usually on people who've got a risky melanoma. We put the numbers into our calculator, and 10% is the cutoff, 5 to 10% is discussed with the patient, usually by the surgeon or other clinician who's looking after them. And we take that one node out, and we can then determine what's the best form of treatment for them. But they're not left with the same sort of complications that they had in the past when all your lymph glands were taken out with your groin. You're often left with what we call lymphodemas, so swelling of your leg, and obviously it affects your way of life. But things have really moved on over the last decade with drug therapies that now work in melanoma. We didn't have anything that was effective before about 12 years or so ago. And they're now given to people with stage 2, 3 and 4 disease melanoma. We even give these drugs as adjuvant, which means after treatment, after the tumour's been cut out, that's adjuvant, or neoadjuvant, which means given the treatment, then the tumour's cut out and you have some more treatment after that. So there's some data that's very exciting. There's 2 types of therapy that have been discovered in melanoma that were effective in clinical trials. To be honest, I remember the therapy on your left, targeted therapy, was the first time that any treatment that had been tried had come out as being effective. And I remember an oncologist who's now retired, who had worked in the field for a long time, dedicated his life to it, done some great research. But he ran a world-first clinical trial of targeted therapy in melanoma patients. And I remember him coming into the MDT at 7 a.m. with a smile on his face and he's jumping. He'd never seen it before, but a patient who had melanoma all around their body, who was looking down the barrel of weeks to live. She was back at work within a week, or times like that never been seen before. Anyway, this was with BRAF targeted therapy, and for a variety of reasons, after a year or so, it didn't seem to quite go as well as what it did at the start. And since then, immunotherapy's been the real game changer for melanoma, first of all, but now for many other cancers. So very important disease. They work through different mechanisms, as you know. Targeted therapies targeting gene abnormalities within the cancer cells themselves. Immunotherapy is stimulating your body's own immune system to recognise the tumour and try and knock it off. And when we look at the mortality rates for melanoma, that's the yellow curve up the top, you can see at about 2013, there's a steep drop in the curve. So the survival rate for melanoma has gone through the roof. It's incredible. It has never been seen in another cancer like this. You sometimes see things in trials or different units data, but this is population-based data. You don't see this sort of thing. It hasn't been seen like this before. So it shows how effective these cancers have been. These are a couple of photos of patients from colleagues at the Melanoma Institute, and these 2 young guys were dying of stage 4 melanoma, and they had immunotherapy, and they had kids, and they're living life well. So I think they're both patients of Georgina. The patient on the right, he had metastatic melanoma that spread around his body, I think when he turned 100. And, it seems pretty odd to be giving someone therapy, but he only had 1 dose, and this disease that he had everywhere was melted away. And he lived to 105 and died of, inverted commas, old age, not related to his melanoma. So it is amazing that the changes that have happened, and to be part of that journey, fills me with happiness, and very proud of the people that I work with, not just in Sydney but around the world, and what we've been able to achieve. So first of all, I wanted to highlight what adjuvant therapy is. So as I said before, cut the tumour out, then get your drug therapy. Neoadjuvant therapy is leave the tumour in, give your drug therapy, then cut the tumour out, and it gives us a chance, me as a pathologist, to look and see if that drug has been effective a short period after the patient's had therapy. And we can look at it. When we look at it down the microscope, we've got a special scoring system that we do to see how effective those drugs have been. And we can tell it in 6 weeks after the patient started therapy whether the drug is working in that patient. If you give it afterwards, when the tumour's been cut out, you're not going to know whether it's working or not until whether or not the tumour occurs, and that might be years down the track. So it's a great system, and it gives us a whole lot of other opportunities to personalise treatment for individual patients, select out patients who need more therapy, develop new therapies. So it's really, really exciting, and it's made a big difference to the field and continues to do so. This is the curve on the left was a trial that was done in the United States just when we were doing our trial. It was a stage 3. This is an early stage 2 trial. The patients had exactly the same amount of drugs. They all had 18 courses of this immune therapy called pembrolizumab, a type of anti-PD-1 inhibitor. Anyway, one group had 3 doses of the drug before it was cut out, and the other group had it cut out and then all dose of therapy. They all had exactly the same treatment. And you can see the difference in those 2 curves by if you leave the tumour on board and give them the drug, it stimulates the immune system more. It's more effective at trying to get rid of the tumour. So that's why we think neoadjuvant is a better pathway to go down and can make a big difference. In fact, this Nadina trial that was led in Australia and the Netherlands, Georgina Long, my friend and colleague, co-medical director at the Melanoma Institute, she was the co-lead with Christian Blank from the Netherlands. And all of us made important contributions to it. But this is a game changer. In the Netherlands, and I think announced next week in Canada, it's approved by government, paid for. Australia, who knows when it's going to happen, but it will happen. It's the therapy change is really important. And it also, because pathologists can look down the microscope and see whether or not this drug therapy is effective or not, it's really helpful for patients. They see they hear straight away whether things are good or not so good, but also we can tailor their treatment. So if these drugs were not effective, we can put them on a new clinical trial. We can give them a different therapy, or if it's appropriate, put them on a clinical trial of another therapy. So it's really, really helpful for patients, us going down this route. I'm going okay with time. We've also performed a lot of research on it. In this particular graph, each vertical line is an individual patient who was on a particular clinical trial. They all received combination immunotherapy neoadjuvantly, so before surgical removal. And what we saw, if you look up the top, most people have got dark blue or grey. That means they had a complete pathological response, which means there's no viable tumour left, or near complete, so that means less than 10% of the tumour was viable. So that's the majority of patients. If you get that is fantastic. Most people don't get a recurrence. And then look for this trial, it looked like 30% was the cutoff that we can say if people are going to have a fantastic outcome or not so good. Anyway, when we looked and did research on this, what we found is that the fibrotic reaction inside the lymph glands after they'd had this neoadjuvant therapy was really important in predicting their outcome and telling us how effective the immune system had been at killing off the tumour. But anyway, we're doing a lot of research in the field. Another important thing that we're trying to develop is something called the personalised immunotherapy platform. It's being led by colleagues at the Melanoma Institute. In fact, James Wilmots began working with us in 2006 and he's done some incredible stuff. But what we're doing, a little bit like what I said before, is trying to develop this platform that incorporates not only clinical and pathological data, but a whole lot of molecular data. So we can tell whether a patient is likely to respond to standard therapy or whether they need to go on a trial of a different therapy or not, or which is the best therapy for them. So we've now developed a report that goes out like this and helps clinicians, that ultimately tries to help determine what's the best treatment for them, select out the patients who are not going to respond to normal therapy, and then feed those patients into appropriate clinical trials so we can improve things further for patients who are not responding so well. Another thing I wanted to briefly mention is something that is a fantastic program that is being done here in Western Australia. In fact, in collaboration with a colleague in Sydney called Helen Rizos, she works closely with a team here in Perth, doing work on liquid biopsy. So the idea is, can you monitor disease over time by looking at your blood rather than having to do scans and other things that sometimes are not so effective? So here's an example of this. This is a patient. If you look at the left one on baseline, I don't have an arrow here, but if you look on the left-hand side, there's a big round ball that's attached to the outside of the lungs. That's a tumour that's spread to the lung. And if you look at 12 weeks, it looks like it's got a little bit bigger. Hopefully you can see the bit that I'm referring to. It's sort of the thing on the left side, this ball. And then at 6 months, it started to get smaller. So in some ways you might say, God, it's lucky that the therapy was kept going. You can argue about that. But in any case, the x-rays weren't perfect at picking up whether the tumour was going to go away or not. In fact, it looked like the patient had progressed. So it got bigger and then got smaller. But if we looked at in the blood at the circulating tumour DNA, so DNA that's released from cancer cells, it was falling from the start. And why that looked bigger on that second scan, it was because of the drugs had stimulated the immune cells to come into the cancer and knock off the cancer cells, so it made it look bigger because there's more cancer cells in there. So there's another test that's been developed that, to be honest, I think needs to be rolled out more than what it is. It costs, it's not paid for by government, so it's not commercialised. Another thing that's really interesting is the microbiome. So in your gut, your body has a whole heap of bacteria that live in there. It's normal. That helps digest your food and do things. But amazingly, it also has an effect on whether or not your body responds to immunotherapy. So in this particular study, we had patients' stools who'd come from Australia, from the Netherlands, and from the United States. And when we looked at the bacteria that made up their stool, some patients who had a higher level of one of the bacteria had better response to immunotherapy and less toxicity. And it turns out if you had a better diet, you had higher numbers of Rheumococcaceae, and you had better response to therapy. So patients who had a, inverted commas, McDonald's diet didn't respond so well to the drugs. And it sounds a bit, it is actually a lot more complicated than I've described. But for some patients, this is important in whether or not they respond. But it certainly isn't for all patients. But something interesting. And lastly, I just wanted to mention fear of cancer recurrence and progression as something that's become a much bigger deal for us in Australia in melanoma since the prognosis has changed. So 15 years ago, if you had stage 4 melanoma, most people were dead within a year. The 5-year survival rate was less than 5%, and now it's 57%. So patients are living, and it makes them worried, understandably. And so we're trying to find better ways to support patients, and every patient's different in the support that they need. Recently, on a separate note, the government announced some funding for a national nurses program, which is being rolled out, including here in Western Australia, to help assist patients with their management of their disease and make sure we're improving things in an evidence-based way. So I look forward to that happening. And another thing that is really important for us is that all patients in Australia get the best possible management of melanoma, indeed whatever tumour or whatever disease they have. And compared to many countries, we actually do it well here, but we're not perfect and we could get better. And we want our national melanoma management guidelines to be updated regularly, and it's hard when people are giving up spare time they don't have to try and do this. So we've been trying to get on governments back to help us, but it seems we're not going to make any progress in that front. So we need to raise philanthropic money to keep this process up to date, because to be perfectly honest, we see patients every week who haven't been managed according to guidelines, and it's disappointing. Lastly, we've made some great progress. I mentioned how the survival rates for advanced stage melanoma has changed over the last 15 years, and it's happened because people have kept working in the field, and each of us standing on the top of our forebearers have done great work. But we can't stop. We've got more work to do. We need to assist the development and mentorship of younger generations of people who are coming through the field to really make a difference. So I think don't sit on your laurels. Whatever field that you work on, try and make a difference. We've got a young group of developing or mid-career stars at the Melanoma Institute, and today I met some stars of a whole heap of different researchers here at the Perkins, and it was just, it was fantastic. So great to see, and don't rest on our laurels. We want to get to 0 deaths from melanoma. We've still got work to do. The picture did look like this some time ago, but we have made some progress, but we've still got work to do to get to this goal of 0 deaths from melanoma. But the great thing is, when you make discoveries in one cancer, they flow on to other cancers. So ultimately, what we want to get to is 0 deaths from all cancers. And what I want to do now is share you an example of what can be done, hopefully, to make a difference in other cancers. We know immunotherapy started in melanoma, and it's made a big difference in many other cancers: lung cancer, renal cell cancer, head and neck cancers, many others. But now I want to talk a little bit about my own personal cancer journey, and please bear with me if I have trouble holding myself together. Anyway, how did it all present? Well, I was in Poland with a mate who's a pathologist who works in Boston, and he likes putting on conferences, and he often wants me to talk at them. But he grew up in Poland, and he wanted, for his last hurrah, wanted to put on a conference back in Poland in a place called Krakow. And I was actually supposed to be delivering a lecture at the Irish Melanoma Conference a week later, and neither of them could or would change their conferences. And I said to Katie, "Look at this, I'm not going over for a week in Europe on my own." And Katie kindly came over with me, and to be honest, I wouldn't be standing here today most likely if Katie hadn't taken me up on that offer. So I could never thank her enough. Anyway, so we were down in Krakow doing this lecture. The guy who did the lecturing with me, we had to talk all day. He's one of my fellows in pathology that doing some fantastic research. In fact, he's one of the people who's looking to help us commercialise that test that I told you about, to get it out there to help patients. But anyway, he's doing a PhD as well. So he helped lecture with me. When the conference finished, Katie and I, along with this guy Arthur Zembowitz and his wife Margaret, who's an anaesthetist at Harvard, went up into the mountains in Poland at the border between Slovakia and Poland, and got up to the snow line. It was beautiful. And anyway, when you go up high, you get brain swelling. And that night we went out to dinner, and I got a bit of a headache. But during the night, I started to not feel so good. And during the day, Katie woke up, and I was sort of sitting on the ground, and and not feeling that well. And I had a headache. I don't know, I seemed to be able to have conversations and be normal, but it didn't feel right. I didn't know what was going on. And anyway, I ended up having a seizure in Poland, and thankfully Katie was there with me and was able to get me to hospital, and then assistance from Arthur and Margaret Zembowitz and others. It turns out what had happened is I'd had a seizure, and I think that's what precipitated me, Katie organising an ambulance for me to go to hospital, and this tumour was found in my brain, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's on the right half. You can sort of see a round bit behind the eyeballs at the top. There's a sort of paler bit on one side than the other. Well, basically all that pale stuff is tumour, and which wasn't too good. And unfortunately, there are different sorts of brain cancer that you can get, and but most of them are not that great. But unfortunately for me, this is the worst of the worst subtype. We classify them different ways. Anyway, this is called IDH wild type unmethylated glioblastoma, with a whole heap of other adverse prognostic factors. Anyway, the standard treatments known as the STUP protocol, you have maximum safe surgical reduction of the disease. You can't cut it all out with surgery, because it creeps off like tentacles or tree roots through your brain. So unless you chop most of your brain out, you wouldn't be able to function so well. You're never going to cut this sort of tumour out that I've got. So anyway, standard treatment is debulking, followed up by 6 weeks of radiotherapy, starting chemotherapy with temozolomide at the same time, which goes for 6 months. And to be honest, fortuitously it happened when we were in Poland, and Katie and I had a bit of trouble getting back to Australia with evacuation people. We ended up buying our own tickets so we could just fly back to Australia. Anyway, this gave an opportunity for really Georgina to think up, look, is it worth having a crack with drugs that had been developed in melanoma, which were shown to be effective, that hadn't been tried in brain cancer before? So to give what we call neoadjuvant combination immunotherapy before my tumour was chopped out. But there's a bit of risk to doing this. The normal prognosis for the cancer that I've got is 12 months if you're over 50. If you don't have the chemo, that prognosis drops to 6 months. So there's obviously risk in doing this. And one of our ethos as doctors is to do no harm. So to get a team on board who Katie and I talked it over, and Katie very kindly drafted some letters, that long letters explaining that we knew the risks. I wanted to go down this path. Anyway, so we went down that path. So we know, as I showed you with melanoma, we know that if you give immunotherapy before the tumour's removed, there's more tumour on board, so it's better stimulated to fight the cancer. Based on what we know in melanoma, a melanoma being caused by the sun, the tumour has a lot of mutations within it that are expressed on the surface of the cancer cells. So immunotherapy is more effective in melanoma than it is in many other cancers. Brain tumour doesn't have such a high mutation burden, so on the surface, the chance of it working or doing something, not that high. I was guessing to myself, but no one knows, but I would have guessed 5%. It's not as straightforward as just the mutation burden, but anyway, the odds were not good. But it felt like that's something that was worth doing after the knowledge that we've developed. So I had a biopsy to show the diagnosis. Then I was given neoadjuvant triple immunotherapy, which can be quite toxic, and then had radiotherapy and didn't have any chemotherapy. And I've also had a personalised cancer vaccination. I ended up having 14 doses of immunotherapy. for these 3 drugs together, I didn't have them 3 at every time. There's been one clinical trial that's been done in any cancer, so melanoma, of those 3 drugs together, and more than half of patients could only have 1 dose, but it's so toxic, the side effects people have were nasty. So it's a fluke, is the well managed, but luck that I didn't have really bad side effects from this therapy. Anyway, I thank the team of people who worked together to give this as an option. That seemed like the right thing to do. But for us as cancer researchers, we've done all this stuff in melanoma. We know what to do to actually see, is there any science behind doing this? For one patient means nothing, whether a therapy is effective or not. You have to have a clinical trial with 2 groups of patients. One group have it, one group don't. You compare the 2. But there's an opportunity to generate some science and to give some clues about, is this something that needs to be pursued or not? Because it costs a lot of money. And basically up the top is the pre-treatment biopsy of my tumour to what it looked like after. And the thing that you can see is the brown stains on the bottom, CD3, CD4 and CD8, they're markers for lymphoid cells. So you can see there's a lot more lymphoid cells after I had the immunotherapy than before it. And when we looked at the subtypes, they'd all changed too. So it gives some hope. Doesn't mean that it's worked, but it wasn't a waste of time. This gives us hope for a treatment for which treatment hasn't changed in 20 years, which is supposedly incurable. So hopefully a clinical trial will start in the not too distant future, but it needs funding for that to happen. And I know that's an issue, but there's Australians are leading it. I'm now still remain recurrence free out at 17 months. In fact, I'm able to stand here and chat to you guys now. I'm not asking for clapping, but I'm really passionate about making a difference in cancer. What we've done in melanoma as a team across the world has made a massive difference in this disease. I hope as a patient and what our team of people has done can make a difference in brain cancer and other cancers too. If you want to learn more about my story, the memoir just come out that Gary Mannix has put together. So thank you for that. It was fabulous to go to the Perkins Centre today to meet many of the researchers, some of whom I know, but they're doing fantastic research. We collaborate on things with some of the researchers there, but it's a great team of people and you all should be very proud of what's happening here in Western Australia. I thank you so much for your hospitality. Thanks, Peter. And also like to thank the team of people that I work with at the Melanoma Institute Australia. And finally, to say thank you to my family, especially my wife, Katie, who has to put up with a lot with me, and our 3 wonderful children. Thank you very much. Hello. Do you want to come over?
Yeah, let's do it.